All right, peace and blessings, peace and blessings. Assalamu alaikum, shalom. Welcome, 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 everyone. Tonight, our topic is the blood purge, why America hates John Brown, and why we need his spirit in 2026. Now, John Brown is not your ordinary, regular Caucasian, okay? He's not that. Matter of fact, I don't even know. Doc, where was John Brown originally from? Was he born and raised here, or he immigrated here like the rest?
You know what? I don't know where John Brown's crazy self was born at. Let me look real quick. Something I should know. Yeah, where was John Brown born? Because that might explain some stuff. He's definitely, if I had to guess, I would say he's definitely American born. Yeah.
Okay.
Torrington, Connecticut. Yeah, he's American born. You don't get that kind of crazy from other places. No way.
Well, tonight we're going to be discussing him. And I learned I redid this program at least 3 different times. At least 3 different times, because I'm learning, even just before we went on, I learned about his provisional constitution. And my respect for John Brown is look, I would never call John Brown a cracker. Just never.
Never. What? I mean, you're violating the Nation of Islam's basic tenets that all white people are devils. I told you years ago, not all. You got a couple, and I would always throw John Brown out there for you. John Brown was different, and he was a man of Christ.
Definitely, I don't know if there's another. I think he may stand alone. Wow. And watching the movie, because I even watched the movie that they made on him, that didn't even do partial justice. That didn't even do partial justice for this man. And then I found out that no state wanted his body to be buried there.
Yeah. I was just getting ready to ask you if you'd ever heard the song that was written in his honor, John Brown's Body. It's an interesting lyric, interesting song, and interesting lyrics. Yeah, you might want to listen to it. I don't know if you remember the guy Pete Seeger. He's one of the people who actually recorded it. But it's an interesting listen. But yeah, they didn't want his body. You're a bad motor scooter when you don't want somebody's body to be put in your soil.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was something. So it's a great honor to do the program today on John Brown. So I'm gonna go ahead and go into the first part that I wrote up. Today, we stand on the foundation of a mission that demands we build a new reality for ourselves, and that we conduct war against anyone who dares to obstruct that building. When we look at the history of this guilty land, we see a long line of those who spoke of justice while holding the whip. But we also see a man named John Brown. John Brown didn't come to help Black people. He came to join Black people in a fight for our very souls. He understood what many are still afraid to say, that you cannot negotiate with a system that views your life as property. He understood that the defamation and dehumanization of our people would only end when we made the cost of dehumanization too high to pay. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan have taught us that we do for self. John Brown's sacrifice at Harper's Ferry was his way of saying that the most important thing he could do for himself was to align his life with the truth of God, which is the liberation of the oppressed. So regardless to where we are in this guilty land, we must understand that spirit of uncompromising action. We aren't asking for permission to be free. We are putting systems in place to ensure that our freedom is a fact that no one can ever take away again. Let us begin this program on John Brown. Doc, before we get it, let me welcome our people to the program. We got Big Brother Willie Rivers, peace and blessings, Big Bro Willie. We got Emerald Jules, welcome Emerald Jules, peace and blessings, Queen. Peace. We got Twin Pyramid in the house, peace and blessings, Twin. Let's see, we also got Mac 285, peace and blessings, Mac. It's good to see you, Big Bro. All right, and again, our program today is on John Brown. Doc, your first understanding, your first learning of John Brown was when?
It was actually, it was twofold. One was John Brown's actions. That's the rascal right there. And I have a hard time pronouncing this. Potawatomi Creek, and also the Harper's Ferry issue. Yeah, that was my exposure to him. I learned about John Brown in American history class a little bit, and to hear that he was the one who actually starts the U.S. Civil War. He fires the first shots of the U.S. Civil War because he puts Lincoln in a very untenable situation that he's damned if he do and he's damned if he don't. And so that was my initial exposure to him, those three things, that what he did at Powhatan Creek, what happened at Harper's Ferry, and the fact that he actually sparks off the U.S. Civil War. And John Brown's name actually comes up when you look at Frederick Douglass's work. Douglass was actually invited by Brown to accompany him in Harper's Ferry, but Douglass won't go. Douglass told John Brown, he said, listen, you're going into a perfect steel trap where there'll be no escape at all. He said, you can get in there, but you'll never be able to get out. And unfortunately, Douglass wound up being proven correct, that John Brown couldn't find a way out of Harper's Ferry.
And you know, for me, I thought someone had to snitch on him. Someone just had to snitch on him, because it just seems like they were really ready for it. And unfortunately for me, I didn't learn too much about John Brown while I was in school. I learned more about him when I got out of school, out of high school. That's when I learned about John Brown.
But no, no one snitched on him. John Brown's crew would remind you of the crew that was surrounding Chadwick Boseman. How none of us knew anything about his personal business until until he was close to death. John Brown, what happens at Harper's Ferry? There's only one way into Harper's Ferry, and there's therefore only one way out. So you go into the federal munitions, you can get in there, but to get out, there's one path for you to get out, and all the alarms and sirens are going to go off. That because this is Harper's Ferry is a federal munitions plant. That's the US government's munitions plant. So just think about any military base. If you were somehow able to get onto that base to get access to weapons or whatever it is that your heart desired, think about the difficulty once they've been notified of you getting off and getting away. And to make it worse, it's either I want to say it's Robert E. Lee that is sent in. If it's not Lee, it's Sherman for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's Robert E. Lee who was sent in to get John Brown out. And when I mean, just imagine hearing that name and them ordering you to come out. It's a wrap. And some of John Brown's sons, and this is why I say he wasn't betrayed as well. Some of his sons die in the raid on Harper's Ferry as well. But Brown isn't killed in Harper's Ferry. They don't kill him. They leave him alive, and they try him. He's on a gurney when they try him.
What a man! What a man! So I wanted to start off with some of the things that make up who John Brown is, and get your take on it.
Okay.
And one thing we come up with, authentic manhood. Authentic manhood. What's your take on that when we're talking about John Brown?
Well, the idea of a manhood for Brown is going to be much different than a traditional provider type of construct and what have you. Brown is undergirded by something that, and ironically, just this past week, I was talking in class about Chinua Achebe's book, Things Fall Apart. And I asked my students, who would go into the interior of Africa, into what they referred to as the dark continent? And they call it dark, of course, because of the population, but also because they didn't believe that civilization, science, and reasoning had ever existed in Africa. And of course, they were wrong. The only people who would go in there that were not African and knew their way are the Christians, because they believe that they're going to be proselytizing and they're going to be converting these heathen, savage Africans, doing God's work. Brown is similar. He puts on the full armor of God, and in many ways, that is his idea of authentic manhood. Because who can, you can't divorce Christianity. John Brown is a preacher. You can't divorce that from John Brown. And if God be for you, who can be against you? And so I would say that John Brown's understanding of manhood and service and all of those things sit very close to each other. So is it authentic manhood? I would argue that it is a religious-based manhood that we're seeing with Brown.
Definitely. Now, there's another thing that we look at when we talk about John Brown, action over rhetoric. What's your thoughts about that, and how does that talk about John Brown?
Well, that's in many ways that's the crux of the issue of why Brown should be considered a more influential and powerful and impactful abolitionist than William Lloyd Garrison. Most people have William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass neck and neck in regards to abolitionism. But Brown is going to take individuals like Garrison to task, because what they're by and large, what they're doing is having these debates, these public debates about slavery and about the direction of the nation and about the Constitution and all of these other ancillary, secondary things that they aren't honoring. Brown approaches it through a different lens. He says, well, I get that you want to sit here and you want to debate and you want over these very important issues. But the truth of the matter is that you're never going to be able to convince slaveholders through a argument, through a logical argument, because keep in mind, the one of the greatest arguments that against slavery at that time comes from a some unknown American patriot who quite simply says, if God is just, and I believe that he is, we will burn in hell for this shit. And he's talking about slavery. Even with that understanding, with your religious solemnity and all of your pompous parade, they're still not going to let them go. And what John Brown is basically saying is that just as you have power behind enslaving them, it's going to have to take physical power to free them. So he's talking about direct physical action over the idea of these really sophomoric, powerless arguments of, well, America's the land of the free and the home of the brave. What we're seeing right now, sort of as an ancillary discussion, what we're seeing right now in Minnesota isn't playing out of that, where you can sit there and you can talk about the idea of illegal immigrants and all of the stuff that goes along with it. Nothing's going to save those people except for raw power, meaning the power of the US government. And Brown understood that. It's why what happened in Powhatan Creek is so representative of who John Brown was, because John Brown is that incident happens a decade before the Civil War ended, probably about 4 to 5 years before it began. It's a battle over Kansas. And should Kansas be a free or a slave state? Christians wanted to be a free state. Plantation owners, slave owners, pro-slavery people wanted to be a slave state. And they're slaughtering Christians, because in many ways Christians are doing something. Christians are acting like the old Oakland Raiders when they had the mantra, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
Mm-hmm.
They are caravanning to Kansas, and people out there are killing them. So what ends up happening is that John Brown's sons contact him and tell him to come to Kansas. We need you in Kansas. And when you come, bring your guns.
Mm.
So he goes out to Powhatan Creek and approaches a cabin that is housing some individuals who are known for slaughtering Christians. And this is his action over the rhetoric. John Brown knocks on the front door and tells them, he says, listen, come on out like men. Because trust me, you do not want me to come in there.
Mm.
Because if I come in there, I'm killing man, woman, and child.
Mm.
The man comes out with 3 of his sons, 2 or 3 of his sons, and John Brown slaughter them. Literally slaughter them. We're talking about beheading them. We're talking about busting skulls open. We're talking about dismembering them, taking their arms and their legs off and throwing them into the river. Because of course you have the biblical basis of quite simply preventing evil from being able to regenerate itself or reassemble itself. So that's the type of action that even predates what he does in Harper's Ferry. And I yield with that, brother.
Oh, wow. So I'm guessing it's like for American history, where sanity is used to decide who gets to be seen as a visionary or who gets dismissed as dangerous, they called John Brown a madman.
Mm-hmm.
So the state frames its own violence as rational, wars, policing, surveillance, while labeling revolutionary violence as irrational,
Mhm.
And that still looks like the way that is done today. Is there any way to um, avoid that? How is there any way? I guess we can't avoid it, but to educate the populace that because they call you a madman for revolutionary violence, or maybe we call it revolutionary justice. I don't know. But is there a way to educate the populace to don't go along with what the government and others say about him as being a madman or he's just crazy, dealing with stuff like that?
Your best course of action of being able to cause people to question that narrative flows from forums like this. You have to present the information about who John Brown is. Otherwise, the dominant narratives are going to be advanced without any resistance whatsoever. So that's, you're fighting for the number one, the right to tell the story, and number two, to tell the story. So the story of John Brown is one that is going to be by people who are more interested in the status quo ignored. And of course,
Mm.
you're talking about and this is one of the most exciting things about the idea of the internet and podcast and being able to get a message out. It's the yin and the yang of it. It's a positive and a negative surrounding it. It is the idea of being able to advance a counter narrative. And when people are advancing a counter narrative, you have to hope that that counter narrative is actually predicated upon truth and based upon historical events, and people aren't just making things up. So you reverse it by advancing a counter truthful narrative of who he is. It's not a denial of the Confederacy. It's not a denial of the US Civil War, but it's a very big piece of the puzzle that is never talked about. And the reason that puzzle is not talked about is quite simply the US textbooks that are being used by high schools are specifically picked and drawn for certain reasons. And John Brown, no, John Brown is not, and the stories of John Brown are not going to be put in there the same way that stories of George Washington are not going to be advanced. If you read British history
Mhm.
about the breaking away of these traitorous, treasonous colonists, George Washington is the ultimate Benedict Arnold. He was trained by the British in military science. And here he comes to the colonies and teaches them what the British taught him to use against the British. Okay, that's a violator. That's someone who has gone against. He's biting the hand that fed him. But you'll
Mm.
never hear that narrative in that perspective if you only read U.S. and American history books.
Now, Doc, you mentioned the name William Lloyd Garrison.
Mhm.
Now, in that group of William Lloyd Garrison, and you got Frederick Douglass, you got Harriet Tubman, right?
Mhm.
And other great
Sojourner Truth.
Sojourner Truth in there. Okay, we got her. Now, the question that I have to ask you is, when we're looking over action over rhetoric, to me, when I hear the word rhetoric, it throws in my mind false statements or word salads, people just talking to hear themselves talk.
Mhm.
So the words that these people, Lloyd Garrison and all the rest of them, was considered rhetoric by John Brown. Considered what? You just talking to hear yourself talk because that shit ain't gonna change nothing.
If that's your definition of rhetoric, then yeah, because without it, it's obvious to Brown that without action, without a will, without you doing something behind your argument, you're going nowhere. People will show up. and we'll call this, we'll give this a name, the Umar Johnson effect.
Okay.
People get together in a room, they will listen to someone like Umar talk rhetoric, they will feel good, and in many ways what they are participating in is the equivalent of what I call a mental masturbation session. It feels good while you're doing it. You can actually do it with others, but from the very beginning to the follow through in the end, you intended to produce nothing but good feelings. How
Mm,
long can Garrison write and talk about slavery before he gets the understanding that regardless of the rhetorical argument that you use, even the fact that Garrison would go so far, and this is one of his greatest and grandest attempts to cross the color line. When Garrison would go out to speak, he purposely stayed with black families. And that was something that you just didn't do. You didn't see a man of any means living with black folk, even for a night. Yeah, that's all good, but they're still enslaved. That's
right.
how Brown would look at it. So where's the action to go with the rhetoric? Because an argument can only take you so far. As
Mm,
as brilliant of an orator as Minister Louis Farrakhan is, um, as brilliant of an orator as he is, what if the Nation of Islam had no power behind it? What would he be doing?
that's a good question.
How long do the people listen? How long? If all they're getting together to do is say "Assalamu alaikum" and they're talking about, all praises due to Allah, and there are no messages, there are no how to eat, how to eat to live restaurants. There's
Mhm.
nothing. There's no fruit that came off of these words. Before long, it withers on the vine.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about the abolitionist, who are the abolitionists that people know? Principally, they know Douglas, they know Garrison, they know Sojourner Truth, they know Harriet Tubman, they know John Brown somewhat. But the one that they really know, that I don't care how unversed people are in slave studies, everybody knows the name Nat Turner
Right.
because of that word that you have up there, action over rhetoric. And that's a big part of it. You're never going to, I want to say it was Fred Shuttlesworth who said, when you go up against a ball team, you got to strike them out. You got to put them out. They ain't gonna put themselves out.
Mhm.
That's kind of the mantra of action over rhetoric that we see with a John Brown. And you have to remember, and it was a life-saving decision. But Douglas wasn't willing to take no action with John Brown.
Mm-mm.
He was gonna die there if he did.
Mm. So even Doc, if we move that up into the civil rights era,
Uh-huh.
then that would still apply there too, because that was just rhetoric.
What was just rhetoric?
What the speeches that were being made, there was no real action to, well,
Oh, no, I disagree with that. I mean, I disagree with that wholeheartedly because when you really look at what the civil rights movement was about, you're going to have you have and it's what it's reminding me of
mm,
when Khalid Abdul Muhammad was on the Donahue show.
mhm,
And Donahue kind of approaches him with this type of question. And he says, "What are you going to do with, this type of rhetoric?" And Khaled stops him and says, "Rhetoric and action," because they were preparing for the Million Man March at that time.
mhm,
When you look at the civil rights movement, let's look at what could arguably, for the modern civil rights movement, be considered the initial salvo against the existing system. And it is A. Philip Randolph going to getting into a rhetorical war with FDR. What Randolph does is he threatens FDR. And he says, listen, if you don't ban discrimination in the wartime industries, because you have to remember that World War II is what brought us out of the, it's what brought us out of the Great Depression. So it's crucial that Black folk are able to get jobs during this wartime mobilization. He says, if you don't, you know, ban discrimination on wartime industries, we're going to march on Washington. And this is the first March on Washington movement. Okay. That's with no action. You could call that rhetoric. You could call that a legitimate persuasive attempt at a persuasive argument. What is FDR's response? FDR's response is, I would love to do something for Black folk. However, if I do that, the Dixiecrats, the Southern wing of the Democratic Party, is going to, in every way, freeze the New Deal. We won't get anything through Congress. Randolph was prepared for that. And Randolph says, okay, if you don't want to do it, we're going to march on Washington and wait until Adolf Hitler gets a load of this. So you have rhetoric, you have an opportunity, you have a demand that is made, but that demand, and the thing that separates Randolph from those who came before him, Randolph's not begging FDR for anything. Black folk, by and large, Black leaders, they beg white folk for things. Randolph says, if you don't do this, we will do that. And that he's proposing has got to be significant enough that you say, damn, we got to do this. And it worked. So you have all of these different moments. And one of the things that I will say about the civil rights movement, and I believe that people get hung up on the nonviolent civil disobedience aspect of it, and the fact that it's coming out of the Black church, which was and is the most important institution in Black America. The nonviolence kind of in the rhetoric overshadows, especially the oratorical wizardry of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It overshadows and in many ways eclipses and mutes much of the activism that's going on, because Black folk are taking action during the civil rights movement. There's no doubt about that. I don't care if you're talking about the sit-in movement, all the marches and protests, whatever. They're definitely taking action. It goes beyond just rhetoric.
So Doc, you're saying, from what I understand, you're saying is that sitting there, going in at the lunch counter, getting your ass whooped, spit on, and all this, and getting a good ass whooping by these demons,
Mm-hmm.
that's action that's going to help the situation.
What came out of that?
I don't know. They got their ass whooped. They went to the doctor. I mean,
no. Let's look at the what happened as a result of that. You're talking about the early 1960s when this occurs, when you're going to have the first sit-ins at North Carolina A&T. 4 North Carolina A&T students are going to participate in the sit-in movement at a Woolworths. I want to say it was Woolworths. It wasn't Woolworths, it was Cresses, but I'm sure it was Woolworth. What comes out of that is more action and more action and more action. You have to remember that the civil rights movement, all the way up until the late 50s, the early 60s, is largely a adult-driven organization until we get the courageous leadership of Ella Baker, who's going to convince the students that they need to have their own organization that makes decisions for them. And of course, they forge at Russ College in Raleigh, North Carolina. They're going to forge a new organization. And that organization is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And you know who the first head of SNCC was? Marion Barry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he's the first head. So it creates a path for not just getting a good old ass whooping and getting the lining torn out of your jacket, but it creates a path, a reasonable path for student activism. And all those things together by 19, you got to remember, Kennedy is killed in 63. 64, we get the Civil Rights Act. In 65, we get the Voting Rights Act. And you get another one in 68. So those those are the fruits of it. The fact that you're able to use your rhetoric on one side, but the action. And one of the things that we miss about Dr. King's genius is quite simply, Dr. King is running, he's very Obama-like. He's running a PR campaign the entire time. When these students are going out here and these Black churchgoers are going out here and they're getting whooped on, that's being broadcast around the globe. And it's creating a moral crisis around the globe. And before long, and to this day, I would argue that this remains, the South is unfairly painted as a region filled with white racist bigots. When we talk about what are the most racist places in America, we start with Mississippi, then we move to Alabama, we may go to Georgia, then to Louisiana, and then to Texas, forgetting about Kentucky and Virginia. So it's action that builds up into something else. Keep in mind, Black folk in this nation have this year just eclipsed 60 years of being equal. You were not equal until the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed. And some people would argue it wasn't until the 68 Civil Rights Act. So you're talking about a very short term of Black activism producing equality for Black folk.
One thing I get out of that, though, is understanding Johnson. Johnson was more trying to build his legacy.
LBJ?
As the great emancipator, the great freedom fighter, the great society. He's working on trying to make his legacy big, definitely bigger than Kennedy's legacy was. And I just don't, because when they took those ass whoopings at them lunch counters and all that down there in the South, that shit didn't change them crackers down there. They just like, come on some more so we can whoop your ass some more.
Certainly. And that
to me, that doesn't equate with because these niggas getting their ass whooped, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and sign this piece of paper.
No, but I agree with what you're saying about all of the activism and all the beatings not changing the Southerner's heart. And I'm being very generous by even referring to them as having a heart whatsoever. They had actually, going to be historically correct, they have these stones that are where a heart is supposed to be. But Johnson is a different character. You have to remember that LBJ is a Texan.
Mm-hmm.
And just when I was talking about, when you begin to talk about the Deep South, Texas is in that conversation with Alabama and Mississippi as being the worst place of the worst. It's the Lone Star State. Everything else is bigger in Texas, including the racial bigotry. So Johnson has that, but Johnson inherits JFK's legacy. JFK had done something that was very interesting to Black folk. JFK convinced Black folk that he was going to do their bidding if they elected him. Because the election of 1960, that was JFK versus Nixon, Richard Nixon. Okay, make sure we get the right Nixon, who becomes president in 68. That election was neck and neck all the way to the end, until the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., again, his troublemaking self. King gets arrested and put in prison. He's going to prison. He's going to the workhouse, because his arrest is a violation of a parole status that he was on already, parole or probation. King gets in trouble again. And what JFK does is he calls Coretta, and he simply says to Coretta, listen, if there's anything that I can do for you and your husband, please let me know. That lays the groundwork for a behind the scenes deal where JFK is going to be able to arrange to get King released. King gets released, but he's not just released onto the street. He's released and flown into an airport that is full of reporters. They snap these pictures, and on that Sunday before the election, black pastors around the world say, "Oh, we got one man to vote for, and that's JFK." Keep in mind, Daddy King, Martin's father, he was a Republican all the way up until the election of 1960. All black folk didn't come in 1934 in that first off-year election of FDR. But I say that to say this: Kennedy got a lot of mileage out of, during my second term, what I'll do is I will address the black issues. I have to get back in here again. He got killed before he could do that. So here you have LBJ coming, and LBJ has his own issues that he has to deal with. But the race issue is piping hot, because the civil rights movement has been going on arguably since 1941. So you're talking about a movement that has been going on for over 23 years when LBJ becomes president. So the idea of race, the topic of race, of racial equality, white folk are so perturbed by the issue of race and injustice that they give us reparations, which came in the form of affirmative action. So LBJ, when I read and look at LBJ, I see an individual who's trying to escape from the shadow of racial inequality that he inherited. Great Society, all of these urban programs trying to help black folk almost immediately when he gets into office. But I also see an individual who is wrestling with Vietnam. That's his albatross that's hanging around his neck. Nam. One of my grad school professors told us this story. I don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but he says that he was invited to a barbecue at what amounted to as a mansion. And he gets there and he says, one of the things that I do, and I think that it is representative of most historians, we're kind of socially awkward, and we will avoid interpersonal relationships with a lot of people, especially people we don't know. I talk very little around people I do not know. Now, around those that I'm comfortable with, I will talk. But if I don't know you, I don't feel comfortable, I will not talk to you. So that's his situation and his mindset when he goes to his barbecue. And he finds himself doing what I do as well, looking at people's pictures in their books. And he says to himself, well, there has to be a great library in this mansion. And so he ventured off and he tried to find a library. He finds the library and he walks in, and he says that as he walks in, there's one guy sitting at a table, sitting there eating barbecue, and it is Lyndon Baines Johnson. And LBJ engaged him, asked him, who he was, what he was studying, this, and that. And LBJ asked him, he said, so let me ask you a question. Since you studied history and all of this. What should I do about Vietnam? And he said, sir, I think it's time for us to leave Vietnam. And he said that LBJ looked at him and he said, yeah, everybody says that we should leave Vietnam, but nobody knows how. That's LBJ's issue. It's not so much civil rights, it's Nam, with these young white boys getting killed by the age of 19. So the idea of the Great Society and things like that, I think that you have to put it within the larger context of you have a foreign war that you're losing, that you don't know how to extricate yourself from, and you have a domestic war that this nation has historically lost, that we haven't been able to extricate ourselves. And that war is the battle for racial equality. And that's what, when you look at all this civil rights legislation around the mid to the end 1960s, and you can't forget Nixon's contributions as well, where we end up with the Moynihan report and this idea of benign neglect, and black women getting to, in urban areas, getting to a point where they are choosing to get on public assistance, and all the things that flow from them having to get on public assistance, and a proliferation of drugs within the black community. We catch it right around the time of the Great Society.
Mm. It's, and I get the part, the Vietnam and America trying to sell democracy to Africa and Asia, versus communism and all that other stuff. So seeing black people get their ass whooped on TV is not a good mannequin in the window of the storefront called democracy. Also with Johnson, because I studied Johnson, and he did a lot of horse trading, with different senators, because he came from the Senate. And another thing that he did, he knew where all the bodies were buried. So here's a man that knows your secrets.
Yes.
And to get them to vote the way he needed them to vote, you better do this, or I know what you did. And I'll have my FBI do a little investigating and see what happens to you then.
Which is the exact opposite of the situation that FDR is in. Mm-hmm. Because FDR is former governor of New York State. FDR doesn't know any of these secrets. And it's why FDR had to basically tell Randolph, I would love to do that, but I can't. LBJ doesn't have that issue. LBJ is able to, tell on you, so to speak.
And I heard, or I read, when he signed the Voting Rights Act, that he said that the Democratic Party has lost the South for at least a generation.
Yeah.
And he understood that and knew that, but that did start a new wave of democratic alignment and understanding that went by. But
you could forge a great argument that the South still hasn't gotten over the Civil War.
Oh, most definitely.
So when you're talking about the idea of the frenzy, what I would call the frenzy, the frenetic stage of the modern civil rights movement, which I would date at 1954, beginning with the Brown v. Board of Education, because you're forcing their schools to integrate. And they're looking at the federal government as a hostile takeover, a hostile organization that's coming in. Think about the lingo and the language that is used to this day. When I first came to Houston, it was my second visit. I had taken a job and I was moving here, and we were staying in one of those extended stay hotels. And apparently that place had a I don't know, a formula that if they have this many rooms available, it's this price. But if they fall below that, then the price goes up. Well, I got the last of the cheaper rooms. Guy next to me who came up after me, he paid maybe $50 more for his room. And he
Mhm.
stopped and he looked at me and he was speaking in jest. He said, "See that Yankee? You didn't cost me money already." They still are talking using the word Yankee, Northerner, aka foreigner.
Mm, mm, mm.
So from 54 to 65, that's a 10-year period. They've been blitzed. Their schools have been integrated. Their politicians who were supposed to defend them against the federal takeover, they can't get around the supremacy clause that's in the U.S. Constitution. That if a state and federal government end up having a disagreement, the federal government has more power and wins. So you have, and that's what Orville Faubus and all of these guys that do these very public declarations. Oh, these schools will not integrate, not on my watch. That's all theater. You know you're going to lose because they will do. And think about what's going on right now in Minnesota. They will send the U.S. military in to handle you if they need to.
Exactly.
And if they really want to humble you, and this is one of the things that you'll find that LBJ and JFK did, they will federalize state troops
Hmm.
and turn them against you. So you got a 10-year period from 54, 11 year, 54 to 65 with the Voting Rights Act, 64 with the Civil Rights Act, where the South has been routed. So when you get those two pieces of legislation being signed by one of our own, by a Southerner, by a Texan, yeah, you done lost the South because there's going to be at least one generation that never forgets that, and you better pray that one generation does not teach their children about how they have been routed by the Yankees.
And you know, Doc, I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm glad we're on it. Um, Kind of like the after 64 and they got the voting rights and all of this.
Mhm.
To me, it seems as though that was like something to cool off everybody, cool the blacks down, give them some things, because yeah, it opened the doors to white institutions. It gave you that access now, but it didn't give you the land or the resources for our people to be able to do for self, which is still the core of the problem. So to me, like, let me just chill them out, give them something, give them a pacifier, so that they will be able to suck on this pacifier a little bit longer, and we don't have to hear the cries coming from them because we gave them a little opening. What's your thought?
It's too late for that. It's too late to appease black folk at that time. And you have to remember that there is a generational war that is occurring within the civil rights movement. And when you heard me talk about the formation of SNCC, that's one of the early signs of it. That's probably the earliest sign of it, that something is going on within Black America. And I'll talk about it this way. I had a conversation with my students who some of them I think are just flat out crazy. Okay. They asked me how long I have been working at the university I work at. And I told them, well, it's a little over 20 years. And they said, how in the world could you work somewhere for 20 years? And I'm like, what do you mean? For my generation, finding a job, keeping that job, working that job was the path, the way that we took care of our family, our responsibilities and what have you. They told me they're not going to work at a job more than 2 years. And I said, more than 2 years? They said, no. They said, if I have moved up in that position, I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere else. If I'm not going to take what I learned from them and start a competing business with them. And I said, well, when you leave, are you going to give them a 2 weeks notice? They said, for what? If they was going to fire me, would they give me a 2 weeks notice? They said they're lucky if I decide I ain't going to be there no more. They're lucky if I come back from break.
Mm.
It's a different worldview. So when you have Black folk who have become adults between, let's say, the period of 1920 to 1940, that would put them by 1960 at about 40 years old. They're happy and grateful to be able to not have to be demeaned in public. They're happy to not have to scratch their head or shuffle their feet even if music ain't playing. Their children who have seen them be demeaned and all of that, that ain't good enough for them. So they have a different attitude. They have a different set of expectations within, and this is all within the movement. So you take a Dr. King and people his age and above, they're fighting one war. But these young folk, they become divorced from that because they're saying quite simply, why in the world should we have to get beat to have first-class citizenship? And it doesn't help any that you have an organization called the Shrine of the Black Madonna with Albert Cleage in Detroit, and it damn sure don't help nothing that you got the Nation of Islam. And you have Malcolm presenting to young people a different view of how you could view the world as to what winning means. James Baldwin chiming in with his idea of who wants to integrate into a burning house. That doesn't help anything at all, because in many ways what they're asking the young people to do, and what the young people are going to do, is they're going to refocus and reevaluate in areas that older folk never would have considered. So by 63, 64, when LBJ is in there, it's too late. Because 64, you're going to have Freedom Summer. And that's when Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman are going to come up murdered. And Black folk are going to react to that by saying quite simply, if they had all been Black, nobody would have came to look for them. So Black folk are divorced that way. By 1965, 10, 11 days after LBJ signs the Voting Rights Act and white folk are celebrating that now we finally have racial equality in America, Watts happens. Approximately a year after that, on October 15, 1966, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale formed the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And that predates Nixon and the idea of reparations as far as affirmative action goes. So young Black folk have already divorced themselves from this process before the 65 Voting Rights Act occurred. You can't even touch them anymore. And keep in mind, 65 is when Willie Ricks debuts the idea of Black power in Greenwood, Mississippi for SNCC. So you have a separation that has already occurred. And regardless of, and many of these people, keep in mind, many of these young folk who are so disgruntled are in urban centers. They're in Atlanta, they're in Chicago, they're in Detroit, they're in Harlem. And these are going to be the places that are going to explode in riots. So in what you're seeing in many ways with the Great Society is, and I believe that you're correct in this part of your assessment, what you're seeing is him trying to appease them, trying to give them some goods and some services and things like that. But they already gone. Now we're going to take what you're offering, as a peace offering, but their ideas are divorced already, and Black America itself has gone through a split where you have some Black folk who will side with the Black Panther Party, and you have other Black folk who are going to side with IBM, going to UCLA, getting a degree, and trying to get a job in white America that will pay them more than anybody in their family has ever earned. So you got a bunch of divisions going on within Black America.
Doc, when we look at John Brown's legacy, what does it teach us about moral clarity in violence?
What does it teach us about moral clarity? That
Mhm.
a man will that history will remember a righteous man for his decisions. Okay, and it will also lambast a man for unrighteous decisions. But now, just because the historical record remembers you as morally correct, it has nothing to do with if you would be successful or not. Apparently, God does not intercede in that way in this realm on the side of the righteous, because we're continually seeing, when you look at the historical record, the unrighteous being able to do whatever it is that they seem to want to do to those that the historical record will paint as righteous.
One thing that I look at that with John Brown, that, he didn't believe that there was a middle ground on the issue of slavery. His moral clarity was rooted in the belief that the institution is fundamentally evil,
Mhm.
and any cooperation with it is a sin. So I think it was last Sunday I taught on the sin of passivity.
Mhm.
And so, me reflecting on that and thinking about John Brown's clarity that the institution of slavery is a sin,
Mhm.
and that if you partake in any bit of it, if you the auctioneer, you're committing a sin. If you're the person that come in to visit the house and you don't have slaves, but you allow the slave to bring you water, or you take part in sleeping with the slave women, you have created a sin. You're sinful.
Mhm.
And so, thinking upon that idea that the institution of slavery is a sin. The institution of slavery, if you're convicted of a crime, is still present. So those who are correctional officers, are they committing sin?
I understand your logic and what you're saying, but I would argue no. I would argue that the idea of, okay, let me approach it this way. Does a woman who, be she a slave woman, okay, Christianity says that premarital sex is a sin, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Does a slave woman who is forced to have sex with white men, be they visitors to the plantation, because that was the sign of true hospitality, if that is their role, to be a bed warmer and have sex with these men during Easter, Christmas, all these holiday moments, has she committed a sin?
No, she hasn't, because she was violated.
But wait a minute, wait, whoa, 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 but she participated in a system of slavery. See, your what you're saying when you're talking about corrections officers, it reminds me of something that Huey P. Newton wrote about in Revolutionary Suicide. And Huey's talking about being transferred from one penitentiary to the next. And he's being handled by COs. And he says, I looked at them as the most pitiful human beings in the world, close to being slaves, if not slaves. And what Huey is really talking about is these men, and this is poor people in general, they can't afford to have a position or even a thought, because they have to do their job duty, or the economic repercussions of it are going to be so harsh that they can no longer live a decent, respectful life. So I would disagree, and I would kind of say, are people being coerced to do what it is that they have to do? Are the individuals that we're looking at with ICE, are they, how many of these guys are living paycheck to paycheck and are more than happy to have that six-figure job that they're getting right now. That's economic coercion. They're falling into what Karl Marx said when he talked about the lumpen proletariat. When Marx says quite simply, you can't build a revolutionary party upon them because they're too poor to be loyal. Many of these people are too poor to be able to take a moral stand. So I wouldn't strip it down and simplify it to the point that Brown does. Because I think that Brown is operating out of a position of no one's being coerced into doing this. Them bringing you a glass of water, no one coerced you into having them bring you a glass of water. But what we're talking about now is, to borrow phraseology of Prince Nelson Rogers, when he talked about erotic city, we're dealing with coercion city. This is a capitalist nation. And if you do not have a means of securing substantial money, you're going to have to do something strange for the change. And I'm not just talking about just sexually. You may have to very well turn your eye, your divine eye, have God, turn his divine eye from what it is that you're getting ready to do. And that's one of the consequences of poverty, and especially living a impoverished life within a capitalist nation, whereas the Wu-Tang Clan said cash rules everything around me. You got some choices that you're going to have to make.
Doc, I disagree that they don't really have a choice. And I'll tell you why. It's too.
Who's they?
The guards working at the prisons.
Okay.
Right. Because I'm going to give you several examples. Now, over in New York last year, they went on strike. Mm-hmm. Because they couldn't use the hole to throw prisoners in for extended long periods of time no more, and because of they were striking because of that, and they were striking because they didn't have enough officers. Now it's illegal to strike. The governor told they asses, "Look here, y'all better go back to work, or I'm gonna lock you up," because the law states it's illegal for y'all to go on strike. Now, what did those damn bastards do? They took their ass on strike. They said, "To hell with the governor. We're going to go on strike. You are going to submit to our terms." And what did she do? She buckled down and submitted to their goddamn terms. Now they can throw people back in the hole for years and never even be a consequence of it. See, as people, and this is what the moral clarity. Because even for me, several different times, whether I was at work when I was a lead tech in the pharmacy in Maryland, and dealing with them, and the owner told me to do something that was against my moral values, and I told her straight up, "I'm not doing that. You can do it, but I'm not doing it. I'm not crossing that line, because I have a moral framework in myself of who I am and what I will do and what I will not." And I don't have a problem telling them I'm not doing that. Even here, recently at the job now.
How many people are like you?
Well, see, then that is a personal growth factor that they got to come into and understand, because there's a price to be paid. Literally, when the other day at work, they wanted me to call the security and have the black person. He was a little crazy. I'll admit it. He was a little out of his mind. But I told him, "Calm down, stop all that ruckus, and I'm going to deal with you as soon as this person get done. I'll deal with you, but you're going to calm down and all that." And he simmered right down. A couple of times he flew back up, but I told him to simmer down, and he simmered right back down. Now everybody was looking at me like, "Push the button, push the button." I'm not pushing no fucking button. There's no need to push the button. And I took care of him and sent him on his way without any issue. But the moral clarity that I have is I'm not pushing the button on a black person to have them come in here and drag his ass out, make the thing all big and big. No, I don't have to do that. And so there has to be that moral clarity that not only we have as a people that says, no, I'm not doing that. Because the more that you kiss their ass to go along, the more you will fall down. The further you down, you will go. And you will be partakers of the sin and become sin.
Hold on. I hear what you're saying. And you're utilizing so many different parts of your history and your experience for that. Okay. And I can hear the different parts of your background that you're articulating. Most people are not that developed to even be able to think about those things. And like you said, they need to come into that development. Well, they ain't there. And most people are never going to get there. They are more concerned with there are maybe 3 major employers in this city. And I was lucky enough to get hired by one. Job number 1 is at all cost, I need to keep this job. If you look at Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro, Woodson makes this point. He says that you can be down a man so much that and have him using the back door so much and so often that if he comes into a situation and there is no back door, he'll go make one. And I think that that's more of what we're dealing with. The exact same that's the structure behind Richard Wright's Native Son with Bigger Thomas. Bigger Thomas ultimately ends up killing Mary Dalton, not because he was angry with her, but because he was afraid of being found out to be in her bedroom. So he smothered her accidentally to keep his job because his mother was on relief and she told him specifically, Bigger, don't mess this job up because we need that money. And when you're talking about engaging this what you call sinful behavior and going down this rabbit hole with them, that's financially lucrative. And we see our people cutting the throats of other us's on a daily basis to sort of get, as you know, to use the lexicon of the slave system, to get a little bigger piece of pork fat to put in our meat. We see that, and it's in many ways lucrative and financially rewarding. And you've been in situations, I've been in situations, we've all been in situations where we done seen black folk who the only thing that they were missing from their minstrel outfit was blackface. So my position is quite simply, ultimately, when you're dealing with it, you're dealing with the idea of coercion. My mother had a friend by the name of Miss K. And Miss K, she told me this, the first day of my first job, I was so happy that I had got a job. I was working at Gorman Rupp, where my mother worked at and what have you, although I did eventually get fired. That's one of, it's kind of a common theme in my work history. But she said, always remember this. They can get anybody to do the job, but they pay you to put up with their bullshit. How many people will find a way to divorce themselves from their what should be their moral compass of understanding what's right and what's wrong in exchange for that paycheck? Because you need that paycheck. Without that paycheck, it all falls apart. And that's what Newton is talking about. These men, if it wasn't being corrections officers, they could have been, I don't know, hot dog salesmen. If a company paid them to sell hot dogs and they earned enough to take care of their family, they're gonna sell hot dogs. And it ain't no moral position that is involved in that. You're utilizing highbrow thinking and a faith in God that quite simply I'll go somewhere else and earn a living because God is my source and my provider. We hear Christians say that all day, every day at church, but let them get caught up in the HR. They don't go in the HR with no swag. They go in there humble, using the word kind of like when you look at these YouTube police videos when they arresting black folk. Black folk act as outlandish as one could imagine, but as soon as they put them cuffs on them, sir, sir, sir. So now you in school now, and that's sort of my point, that when you're looking at, especially nowadays, when you're looking at capitalism, hey, look here, the punishments are brutal. Go back and look at the movie Ray. When Ray was deciding he was going to break off and go do his own thing, and Bokeem Woodbine said, "Ray, you sure, Ray? Ray, you sure? Because it's cold out there, Ray. It's cold out there." And that, we're talking about the 1950s.
Definitely. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. Racial solidarity. Unlike many white abolitionists who still held views of white supremacy, Brown viewed Black people as his absolute equals. He lived among Black communities, supported the Underground Railroad, and ultimately gave his life for the liberation of others. How would you see his total racial solidarity?
I don't know if I could say that I see Brown as a part of Black racial solidarity in the sense of the way the term is being presented. I would think that one of the prerequisites would be that you would have to be Black to have a part of racial solidarity. But what I will give Brown is this, that Brown is so hidden within the spirit of God and what he believes, that Brown in many ways can't be extricated from it. He can't be found within that. And at the core of that is a belief in the equality of all men. Yet at the exact same time, the need to put significant hands on some folk who fight against those principles. So Brown's idea of Harper's Ferry is going in there to get the munitions and what have you, and he was going to distribute them to enslaved Africans and have them strike a physical blow for their own independence. He was trying to wreak havoc throughout the South.
Definitely. And I think for me, when I think of racial solidarity, I look at it more than just liking Black people. It's a strategic and political commitment to the survival and progression of a people. Meaning that if I'm going to be down with you, I'm going to be down with you 100%. So there is no such thing as where the road splits, you go your way, I go my way. Because we want what's good for you, what's good. Okay, put it like this. Obama used to say this all the time. Rising tide lifts all boats.
All ships, yeah.
Yeah. So to me, and you correct me, but to me, this is how I understand racial solidarity. Because what you need to run your home is what I need to run my home. What you need to live your life is what I need to live my life. We need to eat, we need to be clothed, we need to have money, we need to have transportation, we need quality education. All of these things that we all need to live our lives, to live the best of what we can do. We all need that. So I'm not going to fight you so that you don't get it. No, I want you to get it because I want to get it too. So let's fight it together so we both get what we need. There's no you do it here and you over there. It's one mission.
Yeah, but if you're filtering that through John Brown's position, John Brown doesn't see race. John Brown is seeing the fulfillment and the upliftment of the body of Christ. So the things that he's fighting for and he's arguing for are not tangible physical things. They are these intangible, laudable, scriptural things of the equality of man, of God being no respecter of person. That's much different from the idea of racial solidarity. When you begin to and so much of when you're talking about these types of matters, one should start with the understanding of what is the goal. Now, the goal for John Brown and the hundreds of millions of Christians has always been to be Christ-like and to make it into heaven, and to hear those words, "Very good, my good and faithful servant." That's the ultimate goal. Now, can we get there together? Certainly. However, things differ. And this is why I kind of giggled when I saw the word racial solidarity, because it falls in the same gamut as Black unity. These are oxymoronish terms for me. Racial solidarity, what is the ultimate goal of Black folk? Because I'm sure we're talking about Black folk. And the ultimate goal of Black folk cannot be narrowed down to even anything such as racial equality. Because the ultimate goal of so many people, it varies. Some want to get a whole bunch of material stuff. Some want to be left in peace. Some want to kill white folk. So what are we rallying around? And far too often, the rallying point or the rally issue for Black folk has been the presence and the activities and the actions, most of them negative, of white folk. You're bonding in many ways over trauma. That's much different than having a set goal where you have a group of people, and by this, a race of people who are going to struggle for that goal. If they all agree, as you put it, that this is going to be their goal, what I want for me, I also want for you. I've found that to not be true with Black folk. They have their own issue, their own agenda, their own urges. And a big part of that is power and materialism. Look at what's going on right now with once again, what's the song? Here we go again. We're dealing with this idea of the proliferation of multiple articulations of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense's legacy. And you have groups who are fighting and combating each other, trying to prove that they are the true Panthers. Well, so-and-so's son, Huey P. Newton's son, he endorsed us. Such and such his daughter, she said that she likes our program. And when you add it up, so many of these political articulations of not just Black power, but white power and what have you, causes conflict, because these groups are not necessarily going for the exact same thing. They're going for self-aggrandizement. They would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. So the idea of racial solidarity, total racial solidarity, I don't see that ever happening for Black folk. I don't believe we've ever had that or ever will.
No, I don't think that we've ever had that either. But I believe that through my study with John Brown, I believe that that's where he was at. And I say that based on a few things. John Brown in Springfield and other places that he moved his family to, he moved them into Black neighborhoods. He worshiped at Black churches. He didn't just visit, he belonged to the Black church. He moved to different communities where our people that were formerly enslaved, he helped them learn more about farming and learn more about protecting their land. He definitely didn't believe in the quote unquote white savior complex. Even in his provisional constitution, where he addressed the proscribed and oppressed races of the United States, he didn't see race as a social category. I feel as though he saw that as a war zone. You know, he argued because the United States had declared black people had no rights to which the white man is duty bound to respect, Dred Scott, the social contract was broken. He believed black people were a sovereign people who were being illegally held as prisoners of war. Therefore, any violence used to free them was not murder, but liberation. So he literally, in my studying and understanding him, he literally saw himself right there among us, not being any better, not being any worse. But these people, I understand, and I look here, I'm seeing eye to eye, and you're being unjustly held, you're being done wrong, and by God's grace, we're gonna get it right.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you just said. I just don't think that John Brown could ever be considered black. I
would not. I'm not saying that. That's definitely. I'm not saying he's considered black. But when we look at, or my understanding of solidarity, he fits that role, because you don't. For me, you don't have to be black to be in solidarity with where we're going.
Yeah, but see, the thing that throws me off is the word racial in this. Now, if it's total solidarity, I'm with you. If it's solidarity within the body of Christ, it's just the racial part. It puts you in the mind of black folk. You know, total black racial solidarity. No, and anyone who believed that I would question their understanding of black history and the existence of black folk and how we react to oppression and trauma.
You know, it's like how they say it today, where you have whites, you have Asians, you know, and yeah, you know, we're in solidarity with you, da 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 da. Even though what they consider to be in solidarity, to me, is not real solidarity. To me, it's more of what the Panthers, the Black Panthers, and those other racial groups had. Yeah, we together, and then when we meet that fork in the road, you go your way and I go my way.
It's an alliance.
That's what that is. That's not racial solidarity.
Yeah, it's an alliance. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear on what it is. It's an alliance, nothing more, nothing less.
Right. But what John Brown was far greater than an alliance. That's why, for me, I termed it racial solidarity, because he wasn't black. He ain't trying to be black. Mm-hmm. He is who he is. But his principles, his morals aligned with, look, it's my duty to free you. It's my duty to help you because you are me.
But looking at Brown from that perspective, what you're arguing, which I think is a very beautiful point, is that Brown is a constitutionalist then. That he's saying, let's literally follow the U.S. Constitution. And what his opponents would say is that's what we're doing. Where their problem is going to come into is quite simply this one moment. Do you believe that when Jefferson penned the words that all men are created equal, that he was including black folk? Because if you don't, then you have no problem with stripping black folk and curtailing their political rights and their economic opportunities, because they are not citizens of this nation. If you do, like John Brown does, well, then it changes the entire dynamics of everything that is going to happen leading up to the U.S. Civil War, because he is fighting for what Langston Hughes, his great poem, "Let America Be America Again." And of course, if we've read that poem, the repeating the refrain that repeats that the Black person is saying during the poem is, "America's never been America to me." So Brown, under your construct, is a constitutionalist who's saying, let's adhere to and apply the U.S. Constitution, because if you do, these people are getting the shaft. And that's not dealing with race. That's dealing with trying to force this nation to live up to its laudable, august promises. If you believe that, if you believe that Black folk are citizens, you have to look at Brown as a Christian, and a Christian fundamentalist, and a constitutionalist, because he's asking for one simple thing, and that is adhere to the Constitution. And if you adhere to the Constitution, all of this shit would end.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We're going to go to the next card. We are way behind, but this is good. So the next one, the war mentality. When we're thinking about the war mentality, Brown famously viewed himself as a soldier in a divine war against the sin of slavery, culminating in his 1859 raid on Harper's Ferry. What is your thoughts about his war mentality?
He's a man of action. And there's a time and a place for everything. One of the things I often talk about when I lecture about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, most people don't realize where the Japanese leadership was at when Pearl Harbor was bombed. Japanese leaders were in Washington, D.C., steeped in a meeting discussing how do we keep the U.S. from entering World War II? What is it that you're going to need? The whole time knowing that their pilots, their kamikaze pilots, were heading to Pearl Harbor. And once the attack becomes apparent, they get up from the table and they literally walk out, get in cars, and they leave the nation. That wouldn't happen if you had the right kind of people who were sitting around that table. Not that those people could have prevented Pearl Harbor, but you damn sure wouldn't have just got up and walked out, because you'd have played us for a fool. It's the reason why every crew needs a DMX-like brother. One that'll go and say, oh, hell no. And there's going to be some furniture moving. That's John Brown. You need some people with the warrior mentality, the war mentality, who are willing to, their mantra is, I can show you better than I can tell you. That's what you need at times. There is a time for diplomacy, but once diplomacy has exhausted all those means and all those opportunities, well then let's go ahead and let's talk about a different thing. And that different thing is going to 100 times out of 100 be incredible physical violence when you're talking about nations.
Definitely. How would you, I guess if you were in a room, Doc, and you was in the room and nothing but Christians, but you had some Christians with the war mentality, and then you have others with prophetic patience, those who say, oh, God going to burn America, God going to destroy America. So you got one half of the room talking like that, and you got the other half of the room saying, no, we need to do this shit right now. And how do
we're gonna help God.
Exactly. So how do you can you even get those two to agree on a way to move forward?
The question that I would ask is quite simply, have you studied the Apostle Paul? Because if you study the Apostle Paul and understand Paul, you will understand that there's a time and a place for everything under the sun. Paul is used to be Saul. The Lord works with him and turns him into Paul. But the Apostle Paul has these moments where one of my favorite, and this is my favorite scripture. Even when I try to do good, evil is on all sides.
Mm,
If you have that type of hermeneutic understanding, it's not a stretch for you to go ahead and embrace action. Go and look at what happened, and many people, and this is a thing for me, that there comes a moment where forgiveness becomes cowardice,
mhm,
because a person is going to continue to do what it is that they're doing because it benefits them in whatever way until you stand up for yourself.
mhm,
And being a coward and always forgiving is not Christ-like. One of the things that we often don't talk about, or we often don't want to admit, is that if you look at the example, the multiple examples that we have of scripture, God doesn't necessarily like everyone. Jesus didn't like everyone. He told his disciples, if you go somewhere and you preach the gospel and they do not believe it, carry nothing from that place with you. Take your sandals off and shake the dirt out of it. That doesn't sound like a God or a Messiah who is weak. Not at all. So they would have to be exposed to, number one, courage, an open mind, and be able to hear about the prophetic revolutionary figure that we know as Christ. If they
mm,
refuse to look at that, there's nothing that you can do. These are children of Israel who are going to have to die off before you can do anything if you need them. But the truth
mm,
of the matter is that you really don't need them. So there's a moment where diplomacy is no longer going to work, and you have to. This is one of the more difficult things for Christians to really deal with. You got to be as strong and stern for right as your opponent is for wrong.
mm, mm. That's deep right there, Doc. That's deep. Does the war mentality always equal violence?
No, no. I mean, to be honest with you, the war mentality is going to invariably lead to less violence. Because if
Mm,
a person understands the idea that you got to bring some to get some, and they have something to risk in coming over here trying to knock your hat off, they're less likely to try and knock your hat off, less likely to have
mhm,
some significant conflict. You ever met someone who you could look into their eyes and tell that this ain't somebody you really want to tangle with unless
right.
it's absolutely positively necessary?
Mhm,
Somebody that's been in the penitentiary for 25 years, who has
mm,
seen all types of things, and here you are arguing with him about a parking spot,
mm,
and he looks at you and say, "Look here, playboy, this ain't what you want."
right.
What kind of
Exactly.
conflict? What kind of conflict gonna come out of that? Because
Mhm,
you're significant. You're at a significant risk in regards to what it is that you're doing, what you're offering, and what you're trying to do. And that's
exactly.
what it comes down to. So the idea of going along to get along is going to invite more conflict and more violence into your life. One of the things that it's one of my intellectual pet peeves. It is the assertion that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was for peace and Brother Malcolm was for violence. Whenever I hear that said by anyone, I ask them this very simple question. Point to me one time that you saw Malcolm involved with violence.
Mm-hmm.
Now turn that around. You ever seen King involved with violence? Well, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
is this they attacked because of the idea of nonviolence. Because they know that you're not going to, and of course for King it was a strategy. They know that you're not going to strike back. Dr. King tells people, if you can't be nonviolent, don't get into it.
Mm-hmm.
Go over there and grab one of the FOI by the collar. Go to why doesn't that occur?
Because they know there's going to be a response.
That's my point.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of just allowing them to walk over you so that you can get along with them ain't gonna work. Because in their mind, what they're gonna say is, I'm gonna put my foot on his neck and I'm gonna keep it on his neck to make sure he understand I mean business. Versus going over there and you got a very real concern about, oh man, can I even get my foot on his neck?
Mm-hmm.
Because he looked like he gonna fight me to death.
Mm-hmm.
So which one induces more violence? The one that stands up and principally says, "Oh no, you ain't gonna do me like that, Playboy," or and he expresses that by hitting you in the mouth, or the one that is saying, brother, can we all just get along? No, that's the one that's gonna have the violence.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that's gonna get mistreated. So
Infinitely.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was asked a few years ago what was my understanding of a war mentality. And as I was preparing for this program, I went back to retrieve that email that I wrote explaining what I meant. And this is what I said. I said, the war mentality in the context of Black First Initiative and the struggle for self-determination is a psychological state of constant readiness, discipline, and strategic focus. It is not necessarily about physical combat, but about recognizing that you live within a system that is actively hostile to your existence, your economy, and your family. To have a war mentality is to stop being a civilian who expects fairness from an enemy and start being a soldier who manufactures their own victory. The first step of this mentality is moving past the illusion of peace. As the most honorable Elijah Muhammad taught, the condition of Black people in America is a result of an ongoing psychological and economic assault. Right out war. That is the reality. And so, Doc, if we wanted to get the quote unquote talented 10th that
Oh,
that Du Bois talked about, to have this type of mentality.
That the boys abandoned very early.
Is it possible?
No. If we're utilizing the standard loose designation of what the talented 10th is, no. And the reason is that they are beholden to the system. That when we talk about what are the goals of your life, how we were talking about earlier, for some people it's materialism, for some people it's making it into heaven. With that group of individuals, their ultimate goals by and large are predicated upon currying favor with white society. They need monetary resources that are going to come from white society. They need trinkets that come from white society. However, let me be very clear on this. Not all progressive financially successful Black folk belong in the talented 10th.
Mm.
And we have to divorce the idea of the accruement of monetary resources, properties, what have you, from the idea of them being a quote unquote, as they would put it, a sellout. There are many sellout minded individuals who are willing to do harm to you if it means them getting a Birkin bag, if it means them getting the the rush that comes from disrespecting Black men or Black women. They need to be the ones that we're also talking about when we expand that talented 10th definition, that we're not talking about a brother like I want to say his name is John Hope Bryant, who
Mm.
is in every way a economic genius. He wouldn't fall within the what I would term the talented 10th, because that term carries with it a lot of baggage. And those are people who are by and large, from the outside looking in, of no use or utility for the liberation of Black folk. Yet at the exact same time, and I'm measuring my words, and I'm really thinking about this because I've been accused of being one of those talented 10th brothers.
Mm.
And that accusation flows directly from the fact of my educational background. And people don't know anything else about me. They just know, well, this is Dr. Jones and blah. And a lot of things come with that. You know, I had a recent discussion with someone who asked me, part of this writing group, and they asked me, why do you use the name James Thomas Jones III? And many people I've learned, think that it's a haughty type of thing, an arrogant type of thing. And I had to tell them why I always write it that way. And it's an order that comes from my father. My father told me, don't you ever fail to put the third down on your name. The
Mm.
reason behind that is I got a speeding ticket. And at the end of the shift of the officer, and I want you'll remember this. Younger folk will not remember this. They'll have no idea what we're talking about. He had a credit card machine
Mhm.
in his squad car, the old kind where you put the card in and it was like a carbon paper, and they would and it would imprint the number of the credit card, and they would give you a receipt off of that. Well, he thought I said that I was using a credit card, but it turns out I was going to mail my payment in because I didn't even have a credit card at the time.
Mhm.
I was 17, 18 years old. He has written down James Jones. I'm at work, warming up, that first job I alluded to earlier, and I get a call over the intercom system. I worked in the warehouse. James Jones, would you please come to HR? It is the police.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
So I get there, and the officer, the state trooper, was actually on the phone. He wasn't physically present, and he's laughing, and I can hear other people laughing in the background. And he says to me, he says, let me tell you something. Don't you ever do no crime. He said, because your daddy is not going to jail for you. Okay.
Mm.
He said, your dad told us where you work at, what time you get off, what path you drive, when you going to arrive home. And so we straightened out the fact of why there was no receipt in the car and this and that. And when I got home, I went in, I looked at my dad. I said, really? Really? He said, look, I ain't going to jail for you or nobody else. They came to this house and tried to arrest me. From this point forward, You put down the third. You are James Thomas Jones the third. He said, I'm junior. You the third. Because I don't
Mm.
want these kind of mistakes to happen. He said, they tried to take me to jail. Look,
Mm.
okay. So there could be a reason behind that, why a person is presenting themselves that way. And so I've been accused of being that, and I can tell you stories of having to be on committees and things like that, where dissertation committees, thesis committees, and brothers are angry with me because I'm hard on them.
Mm.
And it's only one of my friends. He was, a matter of fact, he was at the wedding. Um, he didn't speak to me for probably about 9 months.
Oh, wow.
And he said, "Yo, you'd have forgot where you came from, and this, and that." And I had to explain to him that I'm on your committee. Do you not think that these white folk are looking at me to see if I'm just going to be on here to rubber stamp what it is that you're doing?
Mm.
No, I got to be more difficult on you than they are. I have to literally perform for them to be able to help you get across this last barrier.
Mm.
I
Mm.
believe, I know that there's a lot more of me that has to do those types of things to help our people. We can't help you in a straight way. We may say, "Yo, take this back and do it again,"
Right.
because we know it's not going to be the standard where other people are going to respect it. But we're grouped within this non-progressive, trying to hold black folk, I got mine, and I'm gonna prevent you from getting yours population. That's not what a lot of us are doing. A lot of us, when we send it back to you with notes, regardless of what it is, with comments, we're trying to help you. Don't take it personally.
Hmm.
And this is one of my favorite stories of people not understanding when you're trying to help them. I was working at Columbus State Community College. I was adjuncting there. I was still in grad school, and I had a brother who was there, and he was in maybe his 30s or 40s, and he was trying to come back to school because he wanted to get a certificate for something dealing with his job, and he needed the class that I was teaching to get that certificate. Everything is fine. They do their first writing assignment and what have you. And this is a brother that really latched on to me. We were almost identical age, things like that, and we would talk before and after class.
Hmm.
I go to class this day, and it's the day after they've turned in their first work assignment, and he doesn't speak to me not once, to the point where it was odd and kind of concerning. So after class was through, I said, "Yo, you good?" And he looked up at me and he said, "No, I'm not good." And I said, "Okay, what's going on?" He said, "Me and my wife, we worked so hard on that paper, and to get the paper back and to see that you gave me a D,
Mm.
that's not fair. Okay, we worked hard on that." And I said, "Okay, what writing program did you use to write the paper?" Because it
Hmm.
was, it had grammatical errors, it had tense errors, every error you could imagine. Okay. And he said, "Well, we use Microsoft Word." I said, "Okay, you use Microsoft Word. All right, cool. When you finished writing your paper, were there red or green lines on it?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well," he said, he said, "Matter of fact, it looked like a damn Christmas tree by the time we was done writing." And I said, okay, look, the red lines means that there's something grammatically wrong with the sentence that you wrote. Okay, you have to right click and it'll kind of tell you what it is. The green lines, that means that those are misspelled words.
Mm.
And he says to me, he said, no. He said that whole thing was wrong then, wasn't it? I said, yeah, but it's my job to get you from point A, whatever point A is for you, to point B. We're gonna go as far as we can. And so he ends
Mm.
up, he goes home and he tells his wife, he said, put it back up, and let's right click. And all the errors come up for him.
Wow.
We're not, we can be friendly or what have you, but that's not my job. My
Right.
job is to get you from point A to point B. And I just ask that those who are fashioning themselves as being race men and race women do their best to help get our people, regardless of where they're at, from point A to point B.
Hmm.
But many of those that we're utilizing the term talented tenth for, I think it's a euphemism for people who are of no use to our race. And I would say that out of that number, the vast majority who are of no use to our race are more economically impoverished, and Du Bois wouldn't consider them leading individuals in our race. And I yield, brother.
All right. Thanks, Doc. So we are darn near out of time and we're not even halfway finished. So we're going to have to come back next week with part two of this. But I wanted to ask you some questions because I figured I could make a part of it pretty fun. So
Oh,
I asked AI if John
oh,
Brown if John Brown was alive today, what would his opinion be on President Trump, Biden, and Obama?
mm.
Any of them would he like, would he rock with, and why? And so I'm going to ask you the same, and then let you
Well,
tell us.
I want to know what AI said.
But what's your thoughts first, and then I'll tell you what AI said. What are your thoughts that how John Brown would see Trump?
How he would see Trump
Yes,
specifically.
yes, President Trump.
I believe that John Brown would say something along the lines of, he's a person that you're going to have to show much better than you can tell him. He would advocate for strong, stringent, frontline attack upon Trump and everything that he is attempting to do. And I think a part of that the significant basis for John Brown saying that would be the violations of the United States Constitution, because he was the ultimate constitutionalist.
Mm, all right. So AI said Brown would likely be fiercely oppositional. He saw
Mhm.
the defamation and dehumanization of people as a sin against God's image. Given his history of fighting the border ruffians and pro-slavery forces in Kansas, he would view any rhetoric or policy that marginalizes or targets Black people as a direct threat to be met with resistance.
Mhm.
What's your thoughts? How would he see President Biden?
Wow. I don't know. I don't know, because see, the thing is about Biden. I know that the economy did well under Biden. You would have to segment and separate topically Biden. But what I do think that he would have said about Biden, and he would have fought Biden along these terms, is that god awful crime bill that Joe Biden created. You know,
Mm,
he would often fashion, because Biden created the crime bill under Clinton's administration. He would take Joe Biden to task for that crime bill and how, the creation of the three strikes and you're out, you're getting this life sentence and things like that. So that would be where I think he would conflict significantly with Joe Biden. And I think that he would have the same problem with Biden that he's going to have with Obama. And that is quite simply rhetoric and eloquence devoid of action.
Mm. Okay. AI says Brown would likely categorize him as dough-faced, a term he used for Northerners who were not radical enough.
Mhm.
He disdained talk and negotiations and would likely find Biden's focus on institutional reform and incremental change to be a failure of the sacred obligation and end to systemic injustice immediately.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to add any more about Obama before I read what AI say?
Anything more about Obama?
Mm-hmm.
Probably the only thing that I would focus in on Obama dealing with John Brown would be his middle of the road milk toast, wanting to be president for all of America, even those who were racist. Obama tried to represent everyone, and Obama was not really about significant action as John Brown would have seen action. As I'm talking, I'm reminded of Paul Mooney.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Mooney said this about George W. Bush. He said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Y'all got a little gangbanger in there now. Whatever you want to say about many of the Republican presidents, and you can say this about Trump right now. They are men who are reckless yet full of action. There isn't going to be a dull moment. But with a figure like Obama, I think that John Brown would have attacked him based upon action, and with inaction in the fact that he's not going hard enough or far enough in relationship to his position of being president of the world. Let's just call it that. That's what he was.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. So AI said this would be a paradox for Brown. While he would celebrate a black man holding the highest office, he will likely remain critical of the office itself. Brown viewed the Supreme Court and the Senate as undemocratic because they bolstered the slave power. He would likely see Obama as being constrained by the very wicked system that Brown believes should be overthrown or replaced by a new provisional constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked AI, would John Brown listen to Minister Farrakhan, Pastor Jamal Bryant, Dr. John Faison, Rick Warren, or Joel Osteen? AI said that he would listen to Minister Farrakhan.
Mm-hmm.
He might listen to Pastor Bryant. Dr. John Faison, skeptical of him. Rick Warren would not listen to, and John Osteen would not listen to. And so when we come back to have part 2, we're going to go over, because I asked, would John Brown be with Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali? And the answer to that was very like, wow, okay, really? So we'll deal with that in part 2 at the end of part 2. Well, your closing comments?
Man, just happy, feel blessed to be alive, to be here, enjoying life at a unusual level right now. Just happy, energized, focused. And being in this space is a significant part of that as well. So, love you all. Glad to be here, and look forward to the next time.
Most definitely, most definitely. You know, I want everybody to understand that when we have these programs, we're not just talking history. We're not giving a history lesson, but we are here to build. If John Brown could see the necessity of a broadsword in 1859, we must see the necessity of our own systems in 2026. Our war isn't just fought with iron, it's fought by ending the defamation and dehumanization of our people every single day. It's fought by taking control of our blocks, our school, and our political destiny. So we must begin to understand and have this war mentality because war has been declared on us, and how we respond is very crucial to our survival at hand. And you know, Doc, when I looked at what's going on in Minnesota and the two people that got killed over what's going on, and you know, my position on illegals being out of the country is not changed. That is my position. But the way that it's being done, I think everybody should question how it's actually being carried out.
See, that would be John Brown's problem with what's going on, because he would point to what he always points to, the U.S. Constitution. Is what is the Constitution worth if you can utilize it, if you can break it when you need to break it, when you desire to break it? Do we really have a constitution, or do we have a situation where it can be pulled upon and adhered to solely at moments where it benefits the elite? You either are going to be guided and controlled by a constitution, or you're not. And one of the things that should trouble the Republican Party is quite simply all of this that they are allowing to this quote unquote so-called president to do. What if you get a Democrat in there who wants to utilize the same machinations that Trump has utilized? That's going to be a horror moment for you all, but it's one that many of them haven't thought about, apparently.
Exactly. Well, we want to thank everybody for tuning in. We want to thank you all for joining us, being present. We want to welcome Brother Roy into the program. Peace and blessings, big bro. We're always glad to see you. And we will be back next week with part 2 of this, because I want to finish this work on John Brown, because I think a lot of things about him we definitely need to discuss and to analyze and look clearly at what is what, and definitely deal with the moral clarity that we have as a people, that we have as individuals, of what must be done. We cannot say that we have reached the mountaintop. We haven't even climbed the mountain. We're still down there in the valley looking up at the mountain, and we have some real decisions to make. And so we thank you all for liking. We thank you all for sharing, and definitely check us out on the different apps that we are on. Apple Music, we are on Amazon Music, we are on Audible, we are on, what is that other one? iHeartRadio. So check us out under The Scholar and The Strategist. That's our name on those other platforms. If you don't get to listen to the programs here, you can definitely pick them up there. But as we always say, You kill the nigga in you, I'm going to kill the nigga in me, and our God will reign supreme because we are Black first, today, tomorrow, and forever. Love y'all. Peace and blessings. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. And make sure y'all stay warm. So you better get the message and get it straight. You're going to need some bridge work. It's simple as that. Because we're living in Georgia.